Good evening. We're gonna bring the meeting called a meeting order, and first we're gonna have a roll call, and then we'll have the pledge allegiance. So, Mrs. Sugars, please.
Mrs. Matlack,
Here.
Mrs. Neary, Mr. Avadia,
Here.
Mrs. Seidel,
Here.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Here.
Mrs. Schultz,
Here.
Mrs. Stratton,
Here.
Mrs. Tong,
Here.
Mr. Goodwin.
Here. And now let us stand for the pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first board meeting after the first day of school. um, and first, we're going to have our first public comment section, and it's going to be any agenda item on any agenda item and only agenda items. And we'll have another public comment section on for any other item, and that'll be towards the end of the meeting. But right now, if there's any public comments on any of the agenda items, you can come up now.
Okay. I may be off base on this, but I'm not really sure. I think it's page 17. It's approval of professional service agreement for the 2019-2020 school year. That's page 17, item 4. All right? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs down, it says, now therefore be it resolved by the Cherry Hill Board of Education that the board thereby approves the list of approved private providers, fine, to perform such professional consultations and services. And I would stop there. I wouldn't go on, and maybe I'm a little bit confused about this because it says, as are determined necessary and prudent by the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. Now, as far as I know, that the person, and this is where my confusion is, and it may lead to confusion also when the IEPs are written, is that the people that who decide about professional consultations and services, whether they are necessary and prudent, is the IEP team. Now, if the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction is on every IEP team, that's okay. But if he's not, then there may be some confusion about that. Like I have some confusion, so that like people may say, IEP team may say, oh, okay, yeah, but we need to see that does the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, does that person feel that the consultations and services are necessary and prudent? So it's actually the IEP team that's supposed to do that, not the Assistant Superintendent. So if you just kind of eliminate that a little bit about the prudency and determined by the Assistant Superintendent, that's fine. But I just have some questions about that, given what I just said, that it's the IEP team that decides that, not the Assistant Superintendent. So that's my question, and it's okay.
Any other comments or questions?
Hi, Jessica Rodriguez, 522 Bancroft Road. Page 10, regarding the policy of student supervision after school dismissal. I don't know if you guys are aware, but there was an issue today at Kingston Elementary School after school during dismissal and pickup. And I don't know if what can be done, but there seems to be an issue regarding the communication between the school or the administration and what the township has in place. There are signs posted along the sidewalk leading up to the school on the one side where the school is that clearly say no parking. For as long as my children have been going to that school, that has been the commuter line for parents to roll up to the front of the school. The kids are always dismissed right out to the curb, and we pick them up there. And today we had 3 Cherry Hill Police Department officers coming up to us one by one in the commuter line and telling us at 3:30 today that as of tomorrow that we would all be ticketed if we were sitting there parked waiting to pick up our kids. The principal wasn't aware that it was going on. It became a really big debacle in front of the school. Parents were outside of the cars, concerned clearly that, tomorrow we're going to get ticketed, and there was no alternative plan put in place. It didn't really give the school much time to kind of react. Dr. Marble then sent an email after the fact just saying that they're going to be working with the district. But it just seems like it's been an ongoing issue for the last 5 years, that there's always some kind of problem between where the school is situated, the dismissal process, and the communication between the district and the township regarding that. So I don't know if that fully falls under that policy's concern, but I definitely would like to, point that out as point of contention for the parents and the school. Thank you.
Yoni Harris, 422 Cherry Hill Boulevard. Staying on page 10, looking as you guys continue your ongoing review of 8603. As a parent of a kindergartner, we talk to a lot of other parents of kindergartners, and there definitely is frustration there for some of them that they would entrust other children who are at that bus stop very short walks home, and that a lot of them have found it taxing in a way, not taxing to be a parent of a child to take care of it, but having other children at home. A lot of the kindergartners this year appear to be the oldest in the family, which creates unique circumstances as you guys go in and figure out the best way about this, with obviously children's safety being the #1 concern. I appreciated where you were heading last month with the discussion, was really, really fruitful. And my appreciation again to Dr. Malash and Dr. Smith for handling my own personal situation with that, have been really receptive and things like that. And just reiterating, once this is done, is to make sure it goes out to all the different bus companies. Since they are independent contractors, I know it's a little bit more challenging because you have, I think, 5 or 6 different companies that cover all 19 schools. And each one could be a little bit different, and several different companies could cover one school. So just to make sure the communication out from all the different levels does happen, and that parents know who to call, so it's not angry parents knocking down the wrong doors, that they can properly communicate this out to the building principal level and all the way to transportation, so that once it isn't done, it is properly taken care of. So thanks.
Any other comments before we move on? Okay, if not, we're gonna close the comments section for now. There will be one later in the meeting. But I wanted to also open up to the board members if there's any correspondence from any board members. Okay, start off, Mrs. Matlack.
Thank you very much. Let me just open my notes here. Okay, as the Vice President of the Camden County School Board Association, I was invited to attend a meeting with Senator Beach on August 14th, and at his offices. The meeting was set up by Jonathan Pushman, who is the NJSBA legislative advocate, and he as the legislative advocate, he sets up meetings with counties and their representatives a few times a year. And so this was the one with our District 6 representative. So therefore, I was invited, and the president of the Camden County School Boards Association, Joyce Miller, was also invited to attend, and she was there. We thought we would have an hour. We did not. We had half an hour. And so unfortunately, the items that I had on my list to speak with him about, we did not get to. But what he did speak with us about was he's introducing a bill regarding epilepsy awareness, and that will require each teacher to watch a video or online training. They haven't quite fleshed all of it out yet. He wants it to count as continuing ed credits, a one-time training. And Dr. Malash, she mentioned he spoke with you about that at your monthly meetings that you and he have. And then Jonathan Pushman from the New Jersey School Boards Association brought up the issues from New Jersey school boards and says that that they are not in favor of New Jersey School Boards is not in favor of passing a new law for Chapter 78 relief. It has sunsetted in their position that it's now negotiable. And they spoke about consolidation of school districts throughout the state, and NJSBA is not adamantly against it, but they're not adamantly for it either. So they're walking the middle of the road on that one. And Jonathan gave Senator Beach information on the NJSBA position on that, so that he could ask some questions and have their official stance on it. That was about it. I did not get a chance to talk with him about school funding or any of the security monies issue that I wanted to ask about. But I did talk with Jonathan Pushman after the meeting and asked him, and he noted that the Library Bond Act of 2017 that was passed, and this 2018 one, Securing Our Children's Future Act, the first one, the Library Bond Act, the money has not been sent out yet for that. So he said it looks like it's going to be a while before we see that money in our districts. But the panic alarms initiative that's supposed to go into effect, the money is tied to the Securing Our Children's Future Act of 2018 that was passed, but there's no timeline or anything of when that money is going to come out. So basically what he's saying is he doesn't know either. But I did ask, but unfortunately I did not get a chance to bring that up with the senator during our conversation. So I will let you know if I have an opportunity to meet with him again in that capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other correspondence? Mrs. Seidel.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. I represented Cherry Hill at the Camden County Educational Services Commission Board of Directors meeting on September 4th at 7:30 p.m. There were really 3 items of substance discussed at the meeting. The first was this meeting was an opportunity for public hearing for the renegotiated contract for Superintendent Dan Delvecchio. No one from the public had any comments, so the renegotiated contract will move forward. And then the most interesting conversation was regarding TD Bank's Project Search. I know I've talked about that in previous months. This is the partnership with TD Bank and the school districts in Camden County to have students as interns. I know Cherry Hill has had students participate in this program in the past. This particular At this particular meeting, they showcased a student success story about a student, Ben Riddle from Seneca, and his success in this program. And we actually watched a video about his success in this program, and it was great. He started, his role at TD was as a marketing intern, and his passion is producing videos and the like. And so they kept bringing him into video meetings, and his work kept getting better and better. So finally he got invited to their national, what they call their WOW conference. And he got to speak in front of all of the TD Bank employees and the higher ups, and they showed his video. And then we got to see a video of him showing his video and him being at the conference. And it was really just amazing to see the success of this program. So I think they said, I don't have my notes with me, but 50% of the kids that go through this program end up with a full-time job when the program is over. So Ben, this particular student, actually starts this month in the marketing department at TD. So it's a great story, and I hope we have future students going through this program. They also reiterated the opportunity for administration and school board members to tour and have a tour of the building and learn about the program, which I personally would love to do. They said it probably takes about 2 hours because the TD campus is so large. So they did suggest that we make that request through our superintendent. So if anybody is interested, I know I personally would love to if my schedule permits, but we've talked about this program for several months now, and it's really amazing, and I hope to hear more of Cherry Hill students involved in it. And then the last item, I previously mentioned CCESC's mental health initiative they're trying to move forward with. There were no new updates at this time, and Superintendent Del Vecchio anticipates having more information at the October meeting. And it was a short meeting for us, so that's all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. Any other correspondence? Okay. There's no other correspondence. Next, we're going to begin our committee of a whole meeting. And the first item is curriculum and instruction, and Dr. Mahan is going to present a couple of items for us.
Thank you. Good evening. I will keep my comments very brief this evening. Tonight I have 2 items on the agenda. The first one is just to inform you that we will be partnering with the Cherry Hill African American Civic Association again to put on the Black History Month production. This year, the title of the production is Our Music, Our Story. We will be working again very closely with Miss Aaliyah Bowles, who was the set director last year, and the tentative date for that show is February 8th. We will have more information and details forthcoming, and invitations will be shared. Any questions on that? Okay, the second item that I have is just to share with you quickly a partnership that we have entered into with Drexel University. We always stand before you and talk about being lifelong learners and how we expect our staff to continue to be lifelong learners as well as our students. And we now have a partnership with Drexel University to provide advanced degrees and certificate programs for certificated staff at significantly reduced rates. So we had an opportunity for representatives from Drexel to come to new staff orientation and share with new staff to Cherry Hill Public Schools, and this information has also been disseminated to staff via CHEA. So another opportunity for us to partner with higher education and to ensure that as professionals we are continuing our education. And the last thing, which is not on the agenda, but I would be remiss if I did not say, is that we successfully implemented full-day kindergarten. So it has been, yes. It was bittersweet to welcome approximately 750 students into the class of 2032. And we have been out and about visiting classrooms and welcoming parents and just sharing great delight. Last Friday, all of the kindergarten teachers wore matching t-shirts that just welcomed our students. We had a design contest. That was one of the things that I had presented to you, and all of the teachers were excited to wear their 4th day of school kindergarten outfit. So thank you for your support. I'm sure the community agrees with me in thanking the board for ensuring that this would be something that was funded. And we are excited. I also would like to thank Mr. Steve Redfern, who is the president of the Cherry Hill Education Association. He worked tirelessly along with me, not only with the kindergarten curriculum committee, but more importantly with the t-shirts and the t-shirt designs, making sure that we all had them and that we stepped out on that fourth day of school as a unified team, teachers and administrators working together to provide quality education for the students of Cherry Hill Public Schools. So thank you.
Thank you.
There's a question.
Actually, not a question. I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, for the successful implementation. But also, I want to thank administration, the teachers, the principals, Mr. Redfern, for all of the tweets on kindergarten rollout, because I felt like I was there, even though I don't have a kindergartner anymore. So it was great. It was great for the community to sort of see it all come together. So I really appreciate that. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Anything else for CNI? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to get an update on board docs, or actually a demo for board docs, which is software to make our meetings more electronic as opposed to paper or even PC based. So.
Right, so I put at each of your places information. If you want to follow along on your Chromebook, you can. If not, that's okay. We'll do a little bit more in-depth training at the committee meetings that are coming up. We plan to launch this pretty much cold turkey in October. So hopefully everybody will be up and running by then. But we wanted to at least just give you a little bit of a preview of what this looks like. And so if you want to follow along with your individual Chromebooks there, you can certainly do that. Otherwise, we'll show you what, and Don, I think if you refresh, can you refresh that page? Hopefully it should come up. You have at the end of your URL scoreboard. So it should say scoreboard at the end of it. Scoreboard. All right, well, so what will happen when we launch this is that I will run the meeting from my control panel. You will see on your individual devices where we are in the meeting, and what will be up on the screen via the scoreboard feature is what the public will see as we move through the meeting. So that's the piece that we're trying to get. Try that now. Okay, so if I jump into roll call, should come up. There we go. Okay. So as I move through the meeting, you will be able to see it up on the screen. You'll also be able to see it on your individual device. You have to click on join the meeting on your individual device if you haven't already done that. And when you actually get into the program, the first thing that I want you to do, because you have temporary passwords, is click on the avatar at the top and change your password. It'll take about an hour for that password to click in, but you go up and change your password from your temporary password to your permanent password so that you have that information. That password is going to be different than your password that you use to log into other things, so just keep that in mind. If you want to make it the same, you can, but it'll be different. So as I move through the meeting, you will see on your individual screens and up on the display here that the The agenda will change colors as we move through those items. So for instance, as we move down to public notice, you'll be able to click on that and see that is the statement that Mr. Goodwin reads when we start our meetings before executive session. Some of the other things that we will be able to do with this program, which I'm going to show you next, is with public comment. So if we jump on down to public comment, one of the things that we will be able to do, currently we have a separate program that we use for our timer. We have a program built right into the program now. So when we have public comment, I'm just going to do a minute so we can see. The time for public comment will show up directly on the agenda there. When we get down to 30 seconds, it will change to a yellow color. And then as we get near the bottom, it'll change red. So some of the things that you will see on your screen, if you look up at the top, you can navigate through the program either by using the buttons on the top or physically clicking on the item. What you will see on your screen is 3 different types of content. One is public content, and that will be what the public will see in the program. One is administrative content, and one is executive content. So for instance, if we are approving, let's say, a student settlement agreement, there may be information that you may see as board members that obviously we would not share with the public in terms of that student settlement agreement. So that is the types of things that you may see on your screen that would not be shared publicly. We are also going to group our approvals as we are now. If we move down to the curriculum and instruction section of the agenda, we will move through all of the items down to the bottom where we will do our vote similar to how we do now. We read the items and then at the bottom we do the vote for that section. So if we take a quick look at the vote, I'm going to move now down to 10.8, which is where we would physically do the voting. So we would have a motion on the screen. Motion to approve curriculum and instruction items 1 through 7. I can select whoever makes the first or moves it. Let's say Mrs. Matlack does that for us. And then let's say that Mrs. Scarpolino would be the second. So I can put that up there and I can save that. And then what I can do is I can take the vote and I can open online voting. So when I open the online voting, you will have the ability to vote within the program. I can do it that way if it's, something like adjournment where we know everyone is going to vote yes, because that means the meeting's over. I can just fill that in and mark it as unanimously. So if you'd like to go ahead and vote, you can do that if you like. And then I'm just going to mark everybody as unanimous for right now. I'm going to close the online voting. And then I'm going to save it. And we should see here on the screen how everybody voted for that particular item. So it should speed things up a little bit, hopefully. We won't be reading the roll call for every meeting. Probably still read it for human resources because that typically are items that require a roll call vote. But you can go in, you can vote, and then we can move on to the next section of the meeting. One of the things that I wanted to show you within the actual resolutions themselves, if we are, for instance, looking at out-of-district placements, you will see within that resolution, we're going to be using a lot of charts. And you will see on your screen the types of charts that we will be using for those types of things. We will also be using, if we move down to the BNF agenda, we look under financial reports. in the content section, oh, that's not the right one, hold on. So I think it's down further, hold on. All right, so if we look under BNF, under the content section, you will see on your screens the attachment there, first bill list for the 9/10/10/19 meeting. That's another item that you can click on, and then you can see, you know, what's in that attachment there. Because some of our items, such as our bills list, will still be done as attachments. There is a couple of other features. If you click on the policy piece that you see at the top of your screen, that will be a direct link to our policy provider, Strauss Esme, and you can look up policies that way. If you look at the search feature, you can click on the search feature and type in anything. For instance, if you typed in conferences and you hit search, that will bring up any time in any meeting that we have mentioned conferences will come up. At the end of that, you see where it says meta. If you hit the meta search, that will bring up anytime conferences are mentioned in any Board Docs customer that's using Board Docs. So if you wanted to see, for instance, how another school district maybe wrote their resolution, or if they approved a particular conference, you could search it that way. So that gives you the opportunity to look at not only what's happening at our meetings, but what's happening at our other meetings. If you put NJ at the end of your search item, that'll just give you New Jersey school districts. So if there was something that you wanted to look up, you could do that. There's nothing in the library at this time. At some point, there may be items in the library for you. One of the things that I think you'll really like, particularly if you're reviewing the agenda before we start the meeting, if you look up in the right-hand corner, you'll see a little, kind of looks like a cartoon, you know, like you'd see above somebody's head in a cartoon. That's the annotation feature. You can click on that, and as you're reviewing the agenda, if you have a particular question or something that you want to note, you can type it right in there. No one sees that except you. So that's a way for you to take notes, ask questions, you know, to remind yourself to ask that question at the board meeting or what have you. So you can put some, you know, items in there as you're going through the agenda. And only you will see that. So you can put those items in there. So that's pretty much, it's just a quick highlight of what we're looking at. I think it'll be very, I hope it'll be very user-friendly for me. I'm finding it to be pretty user-friendly. I'm sure we'll stumble through the first couple meetings till we get the hang of it. But I think all in all, from the input end, from my staff, I've heard really good things about working with it. They seem very pleased with it. So hoping that it'll be a good way for us to organize and expedite our meetings every month. So we'll definitely do a little more training when we have our committee meetings next month, so you have some time to get familiar with it. But I just at least wanted you to get in there and see it and make sure that you changed your passwords tonight. Okay? Is there any questions? Yes, Mr. Goodwin.
Understand that as far as the vote goes, we won't verbally say yes or no. We'll just hit a button
Yes.
and it'll show on the screen.
Yes.
Okay.
And be recorded. So the nice thing too is that as we're taking those votes and as I'm making notes during public comment and things like that, we can convert this into minutes. So that'll be another time saver for my staff in terms of producing the minutes each month. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Sugars. next, we don't have any items for human resources, but next we do have a few policies that Dr. Smith is going to review for us today.
Miss Adrian's high five is it's secret code, which of course it's not so secret anymore because I'm telling you, but to remind me to be brief. So we're going to start with, and I have hard copies if people want. But you put over board docs, so it seems. So I'll put the paper's for me. I needed a lot of copies, so. We'll start with parent attendance at school bus stop. As you can see, there are no subtractions from that policy. There's an addition, which is to let the parent designate the responsible person who would meet. So for kindergartners, a parent must be at the bus stop. However, this addition to the policy allows the parent to be the designator of the responsible person who would be in the place of the parent at the bus stop to meet the kindergartner. And we would use a Cherry Hill Public Schools bus stop responsible person form to enable the kindergarten parent to identify who that responsible person is for us, so we can keep track of that. So systematizes that process. Any questions on that one?
So I think it's pretty clear, but I just want to, so if the parent does not fill out any forms, then only the parent of that child can be there to pick up the child.
Correct.
So no grandparents, you have to be very explicit in filling out forms to have anyone else be able to pick up your child.
Correct. And we would, we actually have a form that we developed already for this purpose, and it contains language from the policy in the form as a reminder for the parents when they're filling it out. And like we did, so we can push that form out through the Genesis Parent Portal to parents at any time during the year once we finalize this policy to get that information. And but until they fill out that form, it's just the parent. To your question, it's just the parent.
So if the parent's sick, they can't come, so somebody else comes to meet the child, that person would have had to have been officially designated.
Because the parents will have the opportunity to fill the form out, we had such a high completion for those parent forms that we anticipate a lot of positive responses from parents as far as designating responsible persons.
In the event of an on-the-fly change, like my meeting ran long, I need somebody to come pick up my child. In the procedure, are you outlining a cutoff time for when that form has to be submitted to the school? And will the parents be made aware of that cutoff time?
So in a typical year, this form would be part of the back-to-school forms at the beginning of the year. So we had over 80% of parents complete those forms before the start of the year. But for those who don't complete it before the start of the year, we would definitely designate the start of the year as the time when we need it. That is essentially by day one of the start of the year.
Right. I mean, I get that, but I'm just using myself as an example. When my kids were young, I had, all my neighbors and my brother on my emergency contacts, but there inevitably was a time when they weren't able to, and I wasn't able to get there. So I would scramble and call a neighbor, and a neighbor would pitch in.
Yep.
So that neighbor, I would not have filled out the form at the beginning of the year. So I'm sure I'm not the only one that's going to happen to.
Yeah.
Or, it doesn't happen to me anymore, but I'm sure there will be a lot of people in that situation. So how will we handle that situation?
Yeah, and we can, And we can look at what we currently do for that practice, because I'm sure that does come up from time to time. We'll call it the audible, designation of the responsible person. That process, we can just build that into this process. Hopefully, we'll have fewer audibles, with this process. So, but I'm glad, good question. Yeah, thank you.
I just had a question about on the language in the highlighted part. I think it's about the fifth sentence down. Well, the first highlighted sentence says parent may designate a responsible person to be at the bus stop. But then it says the parent requesting their children only be released to a designated responsible person must go. So it makes it sound like if you fill this out, only the person you designate can pick up your child, not even you can pick up your child. Like, it just reads strange to me. So I'm not, and maybe I'm just overthinking it, but I was like, wait, if I fill this out, only the designated person can pick up the child? Or am I
We
just
could add
reading
it to themselves or to a designated
Right.
responsible
Or
person.
just the
yeah.
parent requests their children be released to the designated person, because that's what the form is saying. It doesn't have to, the word only should probably not be there at all.
It's gone. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Carolina.
Dr. Smith, sorry, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to imagine the questions I would have when my kids were younger. So if my older child is also on that same bus or in the same school, I would have had to list them as a responsible party so that they could bring their sibling home.
And that's correct.
Okay.
So you could list that older sibling. Absolutely. And this kind of quality of conversation, board docs will never replace. So it's good to policies just got better. So thank you all. Moving on to the next one. So this is student supervision after school dismissal. The changes here essentially are the language was always in there. We are whittling it down. There were a couple options in the policy as written that were not intended to be there simultaneously. So we went through and specified which of the options. All our schools have dismissal plans. This doesn't change that. What this does is, what these changes do is they make it so that we are offering to parents the opportunity to designate a responsible person to whom their walker, their non-transported student would be released at the end of the school day. So similar to what we were just talking about with parent attendance at bus stop, this would be up to the parent to designate. They could, if they don't designate, their child can just walk home. But if they choose to designate, then the school will only release that child to the designated person or persons. So, and we have a form for that also.
So I just want to be clear. So it doesn't matter the age of the child. So
Just for elementary school.
right. I mean, like, it could be pre-K through 5, as it indicates. So if the parent doesn't say anything, then the school will release pre-K through, pre-K, kindergarten. They would just go walk home on their own.
Yeah, and really, we're talking our elementary schools, so K through 5 is where that most impacts. So the kindergartner would, if the parent doesn't designate this, the kindergartner would walk home. So. And this form, like the parent attendance at bus stop form, would be part of our bundle of forms at the beginning of each year that parents all would have access to and complete. So they would all have that opportunity to designate. And if they didn't, and coming back to Ms. Heidel's point about the audible piece, this if a parent's changed their mind or they want to add a name or they didn't fill it out at the beginning and they want to add it later, they could do that at any time during the year.
So, but this is the exact opposite of the other one. So this one says that the kid can go home without any supervision unless the parent says, I want supervision.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And in this policy, what we were doing is really we're not adding language that wasn't already in the mandatory policy. We were just selecting the option from among those. So
I am curious about the safety for kindergarten and pre-kindergarten. They could walk home from school to their own house at the young age, at age 4, 5.
up to the parent's decision. So if the parent designates that they would only like their kindergartner to be released, so it's the parent's discretion in that way. The parent says, only release my kindergartner to me, then that's what we do. If the parent says only release my kindergartner to me or these designated responsible persons, then that's what we do.
And that is the law actually is safety reason. I'm just saying about for safety reason, the law also allow that to happen.
It does. It does.
Okay. I never had my kid live by myself.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So is that's considered best practice in terms of?
Yeah, so this is based on statute and so Stratus Esme, which is who our policy guide that we contract with, they push out mandatory policies that are basically the concrete representations of the statute. And so for this case, the process in terms of looking for what responsible persons designation forms are out there, like I consulted other, you've seen my my chart with all the other districts' policies, so went to all the other districts to see what's out there, and they all use this, and they have their forms that they use for parents to designate. So took some of that language out of there to form our form. Yeah.
Me again.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to envision, how will you manage that at the schools? The kids who are not to be released, will they get called down first and in like a holding area? Because again, I'm just envisioning myself standing outside of Bret Hart at 3:30 where they all just come pouring out. I'm trying to imagine how the staff is going to manage this process.
So we'll talk it through in our level meetings with the elementary principals, but as it stands right now, they already do release students in waves and in different ways through their dismissal plan. So they would be able to incorporate this into what they do existingly. I would imagine that we would see decreasing levels of designation of responsible persons as the kids get older in grades. This would be most prevalent in the kindergarten scenario.
I just wanted to say, I hope parents realize this. If a parent fills out this form, you've essentially eliminated the on-the-fly play date at 3:30, right? I mean,
we will not release if
Right.
it's
Right.
unless to the designated persons in the form. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, my concern is just that parents understand that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of play dates made at 3:30
Yep.
outside.
Yeah. It's so true.
So I just had a question. Is the language that we are proposing or in here, is this in alignment with what the SAC language is, since we also operate the SAC?
This language is in alignment with the mandatory policy. It's not based on SAC. It's based on the statute that drives the mandatory policy. So we have to have a policy on this, and actually all the language that's in here is already there. We're just whittling it down.
Okay. I only ask because what I don't want us to do is have a policy for release of children that counts after 3 o'clock. That's totally different from what happens at 6 o'clock. And then my other question is, and I don't know if maybe I'm thinking too deep about it, do we need to have wording in here that speaks to if, and this is just something I do in my everyday, if we have parents that, or designated persons that show up that as mandated reporters, I can visibly see that's impaired or anything like that, that keeps us out of those situations? That's my first thing. And then the second thing is there any language that protects us from being involved in parent fights in terms of custody? So we have, again, I come from a licensing perspective without a school time, and you have to be aware of, parents that will play I won't put mom's down or dad's name down, but it's dad's day, but she didn't put me down as the parent release, and now we're in the middle of that battle. So do we have anything that we can protect ourselves from being a part of that issue?
So there were several pieces to your shares there, which we're glad for. So custody, we pay attention to custody issues all the time. It's very important. In the case of two parents who, both have custody but might, like you described, they would both, as parents, they both would already be responsible persons to pick up their child. The form is for them to designate non-parents in that way. So so both parents would have the ability to pick their child up. So I think in that sense, and the other point about if parents were inebriated or and otherwise impaired and picked up, we watch for that all the time, even during the day. Anytime we're constantly monitoring for that sort of thing. So that would be no different, in terms of our process, basically.
I have a question about whether is it the statute's language that we say because we used to have the word escort and now we're using designated responsible person. So is that phrase designated responsible person from the statute, or can we just say designated person? Because I guess again I don't want to overthink this, but who's making the call on who's responsible and who's not?
So good question. So the parents making the call, and the reason for escort to responsible persons is semantics. Yeah, I mean, responsible person is a bit more precise to what it is, and that's sort of a so that's interwoven throughout. So you'll see that switch from using responsible person in place of what was in there originally. So. All right, and there'll be other opportunities. This is a discussion now, so we'll see these again next meeting. So there'll be other opportunities as we continue to, what I would say, like knead the dough and get the air bubbles out of it. So the next one, care of school property. So also an existing policy, no deletions, only additions to this. The additions are connected to our conversation also about outstanding meal balances. So you'll see that this policy will be referenced when we discuss the meal balances policy. Yeah, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but so I'll move on to the next policy, but this one will get referenced. So if there's a question about this, and it's kind of hanging out there in the air, and we can come back to it. So the other one, the last one, unpaid meal charges, outstanding food balance charges. This is the one that's generated discussion last meeting. It's also the longest and has the most changes. As you go through and you see the adjustments, I mean, just it's almost easier if you ask me questions based on what you're seeing in there.
I don't have any questions, but I do want to state that I like the fact that we've streamlined this, eliminated some of the things that could potentially have students stand out in terms of ability to pay or willingness to pay. I guess the only I guess the one question I do have is, I would like to encourage is that on a case-by-case basis, I mean, we have to, I want to make sure administration feels enabled to deal with situations where, though a parent or may not qualify for reduced lunch, but if they're going through situations in life or or hard circumstances, those things will be considered and addressed appropriately as opposed to the letter of the law. So I'm making the assumption that's how administration is going to handle it, because I don't feel like those things necessarily need to go higher than just being addressed on a case-by-case basis.
Yes, I would tell you that exists, that has existed, right, just part of the practice of what has gone on. It's the balance, right? Empathy, compassion, and responsibility in terms of what's there, and I would expect that would continue. It's our desire much greater to work with families, support them, make sure the children get what they need, the supports both in the district and in the community at the levels that we can provide to families are there. So absolutely.
So I think this looks great. For me, it hit on all the items that were of concern for me as of last meeting, which were changing the dollar thresholds for the notifications, eliminating the substitution and just allowing the meal of the day, which many children are ordering and receiving anyway, so eliminates creating a stigma for the children. The restricting of the charging of a la carte items, which have the ability to just keep rolling up those charges that parents may or may not be aware of, and then treating the lunch debt as we treat any other outstanding obligation, like a library book, for example. So for me, I think this looks great. This hit on everything that I was concerned about. I mean, I can't speak for other board members, but I think it looks great.
I like the fact that there's at the end of this, there's an in-person meeting, which I think is a nice, sort of human way, but something that's good to have in the policy. I'm wondering if in the coming 3, 6, 9 months, we'll do some data collection there. Once we're having, I mean, this is pretty far out, right? It's 3 weeks, let's say, of meals not being paid and no one's addressing it, and there have been multiple written and phone calls, and now we're at an in-person meeting. But I think, I hope that we'll collect that data. Since we've spent quite a bit of time on it, I think it does merit that. I'm just going to bring up to the first part of this, just your thoughts about, there are 100 million articles probably, I don't know, I've seen one of them and I assume there are others, about how it's much more expensive to participate in sports. Effectively, that some sports are now for middle class and up and being driven out, or people with less means. And I just don't know, do we have a sense of if that's a limiting factor for our families, what the size of that, how we can kind of deal with that? Just because I see, I mean, of the things that eventually are here, everyone's graduating, everyone's being fed, there aren't these like draconian type of things. But are we eliminating some portion of students who can't now afford to be on the lacrosse team, on the swim team, or something like that? Do we have a sense of if that's happening?
We do have a process in place to help families with so for one, our activity fees, and we've, in our discussion, I want to say maybe going back to the spring actually, through our policy and legislation committee, we looked at where we stand in relation to other districts' activity fees, and it's remained unchanged since we implemented it in 2009 or 2010, and it's lower than surrounding districts. That being said, we also have a process where we can identify families can reach out to us, or we can identify families who would need help with the activity fee itself, and then look for ways to, because we want kids to be able to participate. It's a huge part of the total education that we try to provide each and every day for kids, in and outside the classroom. So it's a very important part to us to enable access to that for all students who want it.
Can we just clarify, because part of the care of school property is now we're starting to say the balances are going to, to kind of talk about what Ben's saying, participate in extracurricular activities. But I know in prior meetings, Dr. Malash, we've always stated that if somebody doesn't have the financial means to pay the student activity fee, the district does pay for those financial means. I just really want to make sure that we state that and reiterate it so that we are not now going to say we're not feeding kids and now we're not letting them play sports, because I just want to kind of state that publicly, that we have always helped students and families in financial needs pay that activity fee. So I just kind of want to say that, but I also kind of wanted to just point on the fact that to me, this strikes a balance between making sure that we are holding families who can pay accountable to that balance. So I appreciate the work and the recommendation from the administration on coming back to that, raising the balance and that. But the only, I guess, question for me is on that debt of that outstanding debt, are we going, is the, I guess, go forward plan to kind of put this into place and then start working with that population of parents? Are we thinking that's going to be the go forward on that outstanding debt and kind of getting those families in? Because to a lot of what we talked about in the last meeting, there is a big benefit for those families that are in the middle of pulling them into these meetings that is proposed and helping them get those forms filled out and things. So just, is that what we're going to be kind of the go forward?
Yes, and I would just add, Ms. Schultz, as Dr. Smith talked about, there are a lot of children that we waive into, that we waive the activity fee for them, much as we do the cost for Mount Misery, the cost for field trips, at all 3 levels of school, the cost for other activities that go through. That's just a reality of what goes on, honestly, in all 19 of our schools. There's not a school that's immune to having families and children, who are experiencing challenges and at times challenges that come on suddenly. Then situations change. And again, all of it is about, establishing and nurturing and building those relationships between the school building, the folks in the school, and the families that are there. And again, as we talked about at the meeting at the end of August, it's, relying on folks in the community that are aware, that advocate for other families and advocate for children, that sometimes to help them, encourage them, people that may not yet be connected, to become connected with the schools.
So I'm just curious because in the policy, it does refer to the fact that, failure to address the arrears will result in the matter being governed by the policy 5513, care of school property. And then it does state later on that, all parents will receive a copy of this policy, this current unpaid meal charges policy. But are they going to get information as to what the consequences are? In other words, like, I think when we're, referring me to another policy, I don't know how many people would actually ever go look up what is that policy and what will the consequences be. But I wonder if when people realize what the consequences will be, there might be more inclined to pay their meal charges, or hopefully work with the, I think when people can't afford to, that's a different situation, but the people who can afford to, if they know their children are going to be impacted eventually in terms of activities, they might be more inclined to not let it get to that point. And also it's just a matter of notice, I think would be helpful to clarify what that means.
We can absolutely include it, right, as part of the policies that we would have parents that get to parents at the beginning of the academic year and are provided.
Sorry. Only, I think too, to Mr. Goodwin's point, that I like where we're headed here with the revisions. I just wanted one note about the 10-day timeline after the different meetings or whatnot. For the ones that are resulting that go straight to, I guess they go straight to the care policy, is there any way for us to, as he said, like, still have a compassion or have something that says, but if you make an attempt in those 10 days on good faith? Because if I didn't have it on Monday now when we're talking, and maybe I don't get paid for 2 weeks, but now I only got 10 days before my kid can't go to Mount Misery or whatever. I'm just saying, like, can we have some leeway of, like, but I can give you this balance today? Almost like when I go pay my ticket, I don't get tickets. But I'm an excellent driver. Don't look at my car on the way out. But, like, can we have that little leeway of, okay, but I can give you a down payment on it to show that I really do want to attempt to clear this debt out. I'm just not ignoring it or whatnot.
Yes, which has been our practice. As we talked about in the past, it's going to making that connection. We have waived debt, for a lot of families. We have set up plans for families to be able to pay. The desire is to be together, so we're going together in the same direction, making sure the child gets what they need, and if there are additional supports we can provide to the families, that those are being provided. I wouldn't expect that it would get to that point in the arrears unless it just is completely where there is no follow-up and no contact at all from home. And that's why we included in the policy, we'll send out the letters, come under my signature, with the phone calls and the follow-up with the building principal, and ultimately meeting with us, to get to that level. But Yeah, it's about the connection. You know, our desire is that we get them where they need. And again, there's responsibility, empathy, compassion in terms of what goes on, and each person has a level in that. So, yeah, absolutely.
Just one last question. In the policy, since we're adding if there's no balance, no a la carte snacks, I can see that might be a change, a big change. So how are we going to roll that out, especially for some of the students last year that may have been just so accustomed to that a la carte? Like, what's the messaging going to be?
So in terms of, once the policy's finalized, then we have different sort of groups of people that it relates to, and they all need to be aware and understand and think about how it's going to affect what they do. So like one thing we do at the level meetings is we talk through policies that have been adjusted, and as a group of principals at different levels, we process what that looks like on the ground in the buildings in terms of communicating with parents and kids. So like to your question, that process of communicating with kids, when we have those discussions in the level meetings, everyone's heads being pulled in terms of like knowing their own students and how best to communicate. We'll be able to come up with some good ways of getting the word out in advance. Because come back to what Ms. Carpolino said about the sharing that policy about the care of school property, like the more information we can provide in advance to people and to everyone, the better things go. So it's a great. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
For me, this policy addresses all of the concerns that I had from our last meeting. I like that there appears to be another level in there, for the parents, to give them, more time, and I like the fact that there will be, almost right from the beginning, personal contact with the parent from the school, who they know best, not from a central administrator who for a parent that takes it to another level, So I appreciate that. I also appreciate that there's the care of school property policy is going to be a part of that. That there's some accountability for those parents who have the means, to pay, and for whatever reason or not, that there is some form of accountability. So I appreciate that that's put in there as well. Also with the understanding that there's leeway for compassion for our students who may not necessarily qualify for the free and reduced lunch, but have hardships, and that will always be there. So thank you for the work that was put into this and for addressing the concerns that we brought up at the last meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Reading this the third time, I missed something I caught the first time. Can you give us a sense of damage to school property? I mean, obviously, when I read that sounds to me like thousands of dollars of damage, significant damage. I mean, something that's, a crime, to something that's writing in a textbook, making it unusable. But now, if we're rolling in the food too, I mean, we wouldn't withhold graduation from someone on something on the food level. I could see how we would do that on the crime. I destroyed a classroom. It's in burning flames. I mean, there are more serious things probably than graduation at that point. But if I owe $100, I mean, that doesn't seem even in our best interest to withhold a graduation.
Where do you see graduation?
So hold on. I'm sorry. We withdrew. Oh gosh, I'm losing.
Did you read?
Reserves the right to withhold a report card or diploma from any pupil whose. Diploma, I guess.
Who caused property?
Well, with the school property, I understand.
So, that's just.
Yeah, we if you look at we broke it out by level, so high school, middle school, elementary school. What the and it's the key word being among those privileges that are listed is may be included. So it gives a lot of latitude for conversations about the particular situations, since the details are important. But there's no graduation being withheld from a student. Just want to make sure that's clear. Like graduation's
Right.
not
And,
listed.
and Dr. Smith, and we'll clarify that, Mr. Avadi, on the policy. That should have been struck through. That's on there for that piece. No, yeah, that'll be struck through. I apologize.
I just would like to reiterate, I really appreciate all the work of administration as well as the board, because I know this was some really tough conversations. But I do think as a school district, we definitely want to always make sure we're putting the students first and making sure that their needs are being met so that they can be in the best learning environment possible. And I believe that this policy does allow for that. The two policies together allow for both making sure the students get what they need from a nourishment standpoint on a daily basis, but also if there's, making sure that people pay when they can. So I think this strikes a balance of compassion at the same time, making sure that we're holding people accountable where they need to be held accountable. So I just really appreciate it, and I know there was a lot of discussion, a lot of talk about this, but I feel like as a board, all the comments from the board and as well as administration, this was I think we really struck a great balance, and I really appreciate how much work and effort has gone into this. I missed the last conversation, but I definitely appreciate all the work and effort that's gone into this. So.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Next up, we have strategic planning, and Mrs. Sugars is going to give us an update as far as the implementation of the strategy and timeline for the bond referendum.
Mark, could you put that down? Okay. So tonight I wanted to talk about how we move ahead after we formed our ad hoc committee in the spring, and we worked with our ad hoc committee in conjunction with establishing our goals for the upcoming school year. So as we went through that process, we took a look at all of that, trying to bring it together and talk about how do we move forward when we're talking about bond referendum, and what are the next steps since our failed referendum in December. So what I did is basically I took, if you look across the columns there, I divided it into 4 different phases, and I took both the ad hoc committee and the goals, and I came up with my own numbering system for those so that I could make sure that I was tying in through this document to all of the board goals as it pertains to the budget and finance and the strategic planning areas, and also to each of the pieces of the ad hoc committee recommendations that were made. So basically, what we have here, and I know you had a chance to look at this over the weekend, is we have 4 phases that we developed out of this. Phase 1 is kind of the background engagement of the public work that we would do. Phase 2 would be project determination. Phase 3 would be the communication plan, and then there's a 4th phase, which I'm calling ongoing, which were items that were in the strategic planning recommendations that weren't necessarily bond referendum related, but they were the types of items that, they were brought to our attention that were things that, we'd like to pursue. So basically in this first phase, we have 6 steps. And some of the steps I labeled as 2A and 2B, mainly because they're the types of things that would happen concurrently. And so basically what I did is I took each of the items in the ad hoc committee report, and then I tied it to a timeline, as you see there at the one column, and then put some notes on the end as far as how we would implement some of these things. So some highlights from this first phase, which would sort of be the background work and engagement of the public phase. So 2 of the things that came out of this was the need for a strategic plan. So we have started working on developing a strategic planning process, which we will begin very shortly. That will carry us pretty much through May of 2020. And also, one of the other recommendations was the development of 2 ad hoc committees, sub-ad hoc committees that came out of the ad hoc committee. One that would focus on alternative funding, and another one that would focus on safety and security. So right now, we're looking at developing both of those committees. We would look for those to start up probably in October. The Safety and Security Committee, we would start with a security forum where we would have a panel of experts that would kick off that committee, have a public forum right now tentatively planned for the end of October, where we would have not only law enforcement, state representatives, in addition to mental health professionals as well, so that we could have some conversation about safety and security in general, and then carry some of those conversations into that committee. With the Alternative Funding Committee, I would also see that committee starting in October, and we would start those conversations about starting with kind of a financial picture of the district and where we stand and what our revenue sources are coming from, what are some of the larger expenditures that we have, and kind of how the school district budget works. And then that would be followed up with conversations about what can school districts do in terms of the realms of alternative funding. What are we permitted to do? What are things that we should probably shy away from? And then look at examples from other school districts, and then finally, in a final meeting, come back to the board with some recommendations for moving forward. With the Security Committee, we would start with that public forum of panel experts. We would take a look in general terms of the current district plan. We would take a look at examples and best practices, and again, come back to the committee, to the board, with recommendations at the end of that process. So that would be kind of the first phase, where we would really be information gathering. We would be working with people to take a look at our enrollment. There seemed to be some question about our enrollment in the future and whether we need all of our schools. That was a big theme as part of the ad hoc committee recommendation. So we would work on looking at those types of issues, and then just sort of getting some information out there as we talk about these things, sharing that with the public. Another thing that we would be doing as we move through our strategic planning committee meetings is highlighting a couple buildings at each meeting so that we could talk about things that we've done in those buildings, things that need to be done in those buildings, show some pictures, show some diagrams so that we can start, rolling out information about the schools, where they stand currently and where we need to go with them. So really in that first phase, kind of looking at those types of issues and just disseminating information and talking about things, trying to pull the public in, get some public engagement around some of these topics that we're talking about. For the second phase, to the next page. Phase 2, as I said, would really be more about gathering information in terms of the specific projects that we would be looking to do in the next bond referendum. And that process would run somewhat concurrently with the previous process. The goal would be to have finalized by September of 2020, kind of what it looks like in terms of what the projects would be, you know, how would we move forward, what is our plan at that point. We know, just from our past experience, that we need to allow for plenty of time for state approvals of any kind of project application that we would be submitting. So we would want to make sure that we are allowing enough time in that process to be looking more than likely towards a bond referendum in spring of 2021. So we want to make sure that we are working on these projects, and then by September of 2020, a year from now, having it finalized what those projects are going to be and what those project applications would look like. So some of the things that we would do through that process would providing some building tours. We would also be trying to check back in with the ad hoc committee at periods through that process to kind of talk about what the projects look like, get some feedback from them on, you know, what their thoughts are on some of those projects. Phase 3 of this would really be the communication plan, getting the word out, you know, developing a comprehensive plan that would involve everybody from, you know, principals, PTAs, administrators board, making sure that we have a very consistent message that we're sending out, and making sure that we are engaging the public in maybe different ways than we did previously. I think building tours, you know, are a great idea. Get the public out to see some of that. And then just talking about voting issues in general, how it works for school districts, how they go through that process, and how, you know, we can move forward towards that spring referendum. We talked about also doing a campaign for voting, making sure that we're getting absentee ballot information out so that people know how to partake in that process. Simplifying the ballot questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of control over that. I know that some people found the last ballot question very confusing. There's a lot of required information that has to be in that question, but how can we break that information down so that people can digest it and understand it? So that would be phase 3, which would really be after the projects are determined. How do we market that? How do we get that communication out? And then the last phase really took some of what I called kind of the ongoing things. These are things that would move ahead without, really wouldn't be necessarily contingent upon the referendum, but just a couple recommendations about seeking alternative funding sources, maximizing public and private partnerships, activating alumni associations, and more regular surveys of our faculty for in-depth engagement of faculty voice and ideas. So I know this was a lot to look at, and we can certainly talk about it at our first strategic planning committee meeting next month. You can take a look at kind of what we're thinking in terms of the process. Again, tried to go back in and tie all of this to either board goals, ad hoc committee recommendations, or the two combined. We're moving ahead with our plans for the strategic planning process. We're moving ahead with our plans for the 2 subcommittees, the alternative funding and the safety and security committee. And we will certainly be sharing some more information on that as we move ahead. Meanwhile, if there's any questions from the board, I will take those questions now. Mrs. Schultz.
So I just have 2. The Safety and Security Public Forum, is there any way that we could, especially with back to school night, start to maybe advertise that since it is 6 weeks away. I mean, you kind of just listed some really great people that are going to be at that safety and security, the police, some experts, a panel. I just think that's a really great opportunity for community members. So
Yeah, we absolutely can. I think we have finalized all of our participants at this point, just about. So as soon as we get that done, we will make sure that we get information out about
maybe
it.
we could just kind of put that out there on like the back to school slides and maybe emphasize it and start posting that date and who's going to be there, just to kind of so the community can hear what that safety and from that panel I think would be great. And then I know we're going to re-engage the ad hoc committee, so possibly maybe send an email out to that whole committee too, and just to gauge their who's in, who's out.
Actually, if you look at
I'm sorry.
the number one note there on the top, it says share the strategy and timeline with the ad hoc committee.
Sorry.
Poll the committee to determine who would like to continue to be involved in the process.
Sorry.
That's okay. There may be some people who would like to move forward in that process. There may be some who maybe their children have graduated or what have you, and maybe would not be interested. So I wanted you to hear it first.
That's what I was going to add. Now that you guys know about it, now we can start advertising the rest of it.
Mr. Avadia.
I recall there are like 5 days we can go out for the bond. I'm just wondering how tight the plan is. Spring 2021 is May or March?
March.
It's March. I just wonder if it makes sense. I don't know. I frankly don't know if it's possible, but to back up the September date to maybe June, just because I think our last experience is that it takes the state a while. And my concern, I mean, frankly, being if we miss March, now we're talking about an additional op cycle. We've already got, I think, 2 since Bond 1.0. And I think there's work that absolutely needs to be done. Do you think it's reasonable? Do you think it's possible to get back that far?
I think June would be tough. I think we could talk about August. I mean, my plan would be that this is all done and wrapped up and, your board approving them the end of August for a September submission. So I think we could maybe push it to August. I don't think we could go much sooner than that. Any other questions? Mr. Avadia.
I'm just wondering, I don't know, maybe it's my own being naive, but it strikes me that security is the kind of thing that we could spend $100 million or $150 million. Is it possible, as we're getting all these experts together, and I mean, I think that's a great idea, to kind of give a sense of what $30 million means, $55 million, or to somehow gauge that discussion? Because security, it just strikes me, could be $500 million to $10 million, and that's going to look different, but I think we can improve our situation in any of those circumstances. At some point, it's an appetite to pay. Is it well, I guess the better question is, could that grow out of the work that starts at the forum?
Well, I think that I think the purpose of the forum would really be more to talk about best practices, what we're seeing in other school districts, and then kind of extrapolating from that what would be appropriate for Cherry Hill. Some of the security measures that we had proposed seemed to be very polarizing. In some of the feedback that we got in the surveys, some people felt very strongly about some of the aspects. So I think we need to make a decision about what's appropriate for Cherry Hill, and then kind of figure out what the budget would bear from that. You're right. I mean, again, there's a balance between still wanting our schools to feel like warm, friendly places, and kind of that balance between safety and security and warm, friendly, welcoming places. So you're right. We could spend probably significant money on that, but I think we'll have to find that balance after we decide what's best for Cherry Hill. Mrs. Stratton.
For the people on the members of the ad hoc committee that may say no thank you when you reach out, what's the process for if we're going to replace those folks quickly? Because I don't know how that initial process went.
I don't think we would replace them at this point. I mean, we had 28 members on the committee, so we certainly, even if a few opt out, I think we'll have plenty of feedback from those members. I think it would be difficult to swap people out at this point because they weren't part of the initial process and kind of what the end results were.
Okay, so it won't slow us down at
No.
all?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I, just on the security piece, I think you mentioned it, but I just would like to reiterate just the whole thing around security is not just physical security, it's also the mental
Yes.
part where your mental health and making sure, and so that's going to be all part of that.
Yes, we would have a mental health professional as part of the panel. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's all of our committee of the whole items. Next, we're going to move into our special action agenda. And first up, I'm going to ask Mrs. Matlack to move the items for curriculum and instruction.
Certainly, thank you very much. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, approval of attendance at conference and workshops for the 2019-2020 school year. Number 2, approval of out-of-district student placements for the 2019-2020 school year. Number 3, approval of service agreement between the board and Epic Health Services Incorporated. And number 4, approval of professional service agreement for the 2019-2020 school year. Do I have a second? Mrs. Seidel, are there any comments or questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars?
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mr. Avadia,
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mrs. Stratton,
Yes.
Mrs. Tong,
Yes.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Matlack. And next up, for the B&F committee, I'm going to ask Mrs. Schultz to move those items, please.
The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, approval of bill list. Number 2, resolution for the award of bids. And number 3, resolution authorizing professional service agreement with Environmental Resolution Incorporated for provisions of ADA services. Do I have a second?
I'm sorry, Mrs. Schultz, you have an add-on as well.
Oh, yes, sorry. And there's a blue sheet to additions to number 2 and number 3. Do I have a second? Mrs. Matlack. Are there any questions? Seeing none.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mr. Avadia,
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Yes.
Mrs. Stratton,
Yes.
Mrs. Tong,
Yes.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Schultz. And next up, for HR, I'm going to ask Mrs. Tong to move those items, please.
The superintendent recommends the following. 1, termination of employment certificated. 2, termination of employment non-certificated. Number 3, appointment certificated. 4, appointment non-certificated. 5, assignment salary change non-certificated. 6, other compensation certificated. And on the pink sheet, we have additional from 1 to 5, and then number 7, other compensation non-certificated.
Do you have a second? Ask for it.
Are there any,
Second.
is there a second? Mrs. Malak, are there any questions? See now, Mrs. Sugar?
Mrs. Tong,
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mr. Avadia,
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mrs. Stratton,
Yes.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Tong. We don't have any items for P&L, nor do we have any items for strategic planning. So we're going to go ahead and move to our second public comment section. This is the second public comment section. You can speak on any item. If you would like to speak, please speak into the microphone and clearly state your name and address. Each speaker will be given maximum of 3 minutes to speak. The timer on the screen behind me will indicate the amount of time you have remaining.
Hi. Is it on? Okay. Beth Becker, 17 Dunbarton Road. I didn't plan to say anything. I just have a couple comments about stuff that happened during the meeting. First, I just want to let you know the releasing of students at elementary schools, the way it's going, they may be staggering in the classrooms, but we've noticed a real increase at Stockton with full day kindergarten, that it's kind of a free-for-all because the bus students go out the front doors. The SAC doors are closed, I guess, for SAC, which is over by the APR. And so all the students come out the kindergarten classrooms, which has been the policy for the last couple of years. But, and it's the policy at the school at least. I don't know if it's a formal policy, but it's kind of how it works, that 1st through 5th are just released, but the kindergarten students are to be released to an individual. So the poor teachers, the poor kindergarten teachers are just set up for failure in this, because it's just so chaotic. There's so many parents standing there that trying to find the parent that goes with the student. I mean, I'm sure it'll get smoother in the next couple of weeks, but I know it's always kind of chaos there. So they may be doing it in the classroom by the time the kids get to the door. It's very chaotic. So I just want to let you guys know that as someone who's there every day. The other thing is I wanted to ask you to look into the threshold for the students who need help with the free and reduced lunch. So if you look at the chart of the guidelines, it's really, really low. And I think there might be families who don't necessarily qualify for free and reduced lunch, but who still have trouble and are food insecure. So I didn't know what the threshold was, or if the board had, or if the administration, I don't know who's in charge of that, has looked at what the threshold is going to be for helping students and how you're going to identify those students. A couple of things. Oh, the file that Ms. Sugars showed, could that be on the website or either under the bond link on the website or with the board minutes? Because we couldn't see it, and I think it would be good for everyone to see too. It was just too small on the screens for anybody to read it. And also I wanted to ask for the safety. Law enforcement is not necessarily school safety experts. I think school safety is a very, very specific subset. And I would ask that some specific school safety experts be on that panel as well, for you to consider that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening. Kim Friedel, 9 Gately Court. I just have actually a couple of questions and comments also. Number one, the presentation on the board docs, I think what I heard said was that when you do your vote, instead of going around the room, you're going to be pushing a button and it's going to come up on the screen. So my question is the screen going to be visible to the people who are watching from live stream? Because tonight in the room, it was hard hearing some of the board members, even with microphones. So if there's now no vocal and we can't see the screen, then we're not being able to see or hear what's going on. Number two, I'm a little confused about the two policies, Dr. Smith. So what I think I heard was if you're a kindergartner and you ride a bus, a designated person has to pick you up from the bus. But if you're a kindergartner at a school and you're a walker, if your parent says you can walk home alone, you can walk home alone. So it kind of seems contradictory to me. Like, why can a kindergartner not get off the bus and walk up to their door, but from the school they could walk potentially 15 blocks by themselves? So I just throw that out. I don't have kindergartners anymore either. So I had a question similar to what Beth just asked. Mine was more directed to assistance to families related to the activity fees. Do we use the same guidelines as free and reduced lunch in determining if a family needs assistance for Mount Misery or the activity fee? Or is there any leeway in that policy? And the last thing I want to say is the meal policy has been very controversial, and it really has had everybody on both sides having a lot to say. I think what I heard tonight is very reassuring. It really seems to take into account the needs of our students, not putting them in the middle, finding ways to have families who can pay be accountable. So I applaud the work that has gone into this, and I think it is a really good compromise on finding a policy that works for everybody. So thank you for all of your work.
Thank you.
Yoni Yaris, 422 Cherry Hill Boulevard. Wanted to note that Aaliyah Bowles was a Cherry Hill alumni. If we can make it a policy, anytime we mention an alum of the district, that we state that they're alumni of the district. I think it's really important that we honor that and take pride in the amazing products that we produce. Curious about the 20% of families who didn't fill out on Genesis, just what was the cause of that. It's really great to be 80%, but it's trying to figure out what happened to the other 20% so that we can get next year. Dr. Smith is announcing 90% of the families did that, and the year after we're closer and closer to having every family in the district ahead of time filling out the documents. The kindergarten rollout was incredible. My daughter has come home very happy. As a kindergarten, excited to see the rest of my kids go through, knowing that each year will get better and better as we work things out and learn. Also fun to see on Facebook other parents in other towns being jealous that we got full day kindergarten and they don't have it yet. So it's always good to be on that side of the jealousy. Also, another Cherry Hill alumni in the news, Ben Abo, who was down in Florida, went down to the Bahamas. He has a habit of saving lives and just being out there. He graduated East in '98, and just another one of our really amazing products doing great work for our communities. Curious if we're going to pass along the draft policy to our elected leaders. I was at the town hall meeting last week, and Assemblywoman Lampett happened to call the district again and seemed to ignore the previous school board meeting that took place, where this was the working towards this, and just make sure they're aware that you've been proactive, really trying to find a workable solution, and now the ball is in their court, and they really need to do what they can on the legislative angle. And if it's possible for Dr. Malash to reach out to the parents again, like he did in the amazing letter that was shared right before school started, to let parents know that a lot of the challenges that we face aren't on us, it's on the state legislators and what they do, and that parents have the voice to be able to go and advocate to the parent legislators about some of these concerns coming down the pike. For the security ad hoc, are we going to make sure there's no leaks coming out of that committee? Security is very sensitive, and I'm guessing that committee will be made aware of additional items that we wouldn't necessarily out in the public, just to make sure that that stays in that room when needed, so we don't have things getting out to parents unnecessarily and out to students, things that we wouldn't want to have out to evil parties, for lack of a better term. For when the building information is given out at strategic planning, are the building principals going to be invited because they know those buildings best, if possible, so they can also present to the board at those meetings? And then I'm just concerned if we happen to shift to a September date for the next referendum, is just to be very cautious of the Jewish holidays. It was an issue with the previous time before we had to get pushed through the state, kicking the ball on us. It's just that we could dodge the September dates with our large Jewish population in that area is growing, and to make sure that all our voters can be engaged and we're not forced to put voting hours into late at night to be able to accommodate for that. So I would say try to steer clear of September, and hopefully the state will recognize that difficult calendar, that a lot of things are still Monday, Tuesday. So once again, on the state, not necessarily on us, but for us to be aware of that. And I think that covers it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Rosie Arroyo, 105 Forest Road. I just have three things regarding the recognition of Week of Respect. There's some resources now available that are free to schools and law enforcement that offer different workshops. So if I could send that information along so you guys can have access to that during that week, as well as the School Violence Awareness Week. There are experts already that are being contracted by the county to work with schools and law enforcement for that. So I just wanted to give you that information. That way you have access and you can coordinate that before schedules are full. And I'm really excited about the school security panel discussion. Most of you know my expertise is in reducing school violence and delinquency behaviors. So if I could be of a resource as you know, share resources, provide pamphlets and brochures of different activities or events in the community that individuals can be involved with, parents can access, I can forward that information along as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeff Podowitz. I live in 110 Kilburn Drive, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and this is about school funding. I asked you to put Cherry Hill Public Schools testimony of Sharon Joshio, Cherry Hill's Board of Education, March 20th, 2007, to put that up on the website again so people can understand the background of when the cheating started. All right, and what she did list was that 20 years ago, which is 20 years before that date, okay, Cherry Hill was cut $5.3 million in 1990, and the cutting continued, didn't stop. There's an article going to be published, NJ Education Aid. Please go to that website right now. What is up is a Facebook and a Twitter saying that this started, the underfunding started 29 years ago. That was under Governor Florio, which equates to this time, all right, and the cutting was done. What he specifically feels is that that has affected us even now, 29 years later, and he feels that that's why South Jersey, it's very troubling what's happened to us in South Jersey. And that, because of what happened back then 29 years ago, South Jersey is still being underfunded. He will, I think, mention Cherry Hill, but we're really being slaughtered. A lot of it has to do with the fact that the way they counted income in the aid, not just property taxes. I think we need to work together with our leadership. So basically, when Toms Rivers went down to the state, their town council went down, representatives from the union went down, their school board members went down, standing up for the people of Toms River that they felt were being cheated. That has to happen here, including our assembly people and our senator. This started 29 years ago, and if you read what he says, it was politics. It was politics that created the problem, and that's why we were cut more than other districts. Pure politics. I think he called it the 42-21 rule or something. You have to work it out politically, and they worked it out politically. But please go to that blog. Please go to that blog, NJ Education Aid.
Thank you.
Rick Short, 1002 Chelton Parkway. I guess a question for Dr. Smith is, and I don't follow it exactly, but does this new policy, this new food policy include breakfast? I don't know. I haven't seen it. Maybe we should have it if it's not in it. I want to talk about 813. On 813, I complimented the district and Mrs. Sugars on her transparency. It's the first thing I did when I came up. I complimented you. On 827, there was a reallocation of budget transfer within the budget of over $60,000. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of fence. Yes, the district is allowed to reallocate, but I think it's in the best interest that the district is transparent when it does something that large. I'm also going to send an email about a purchase on October 24th, 2017. It's one for $167,470 for educational services. I've been looking through the records and I can't find that the district actually approved it. But moreover, the most important thing is security. The question is just some rough numbers, because I just did ask Assembly Greenwald's office when the ELISA law is coming about, and it's just in a bundle screw up of bond money. So if this thing is approved in May of 2021, now you're pushing security out to January 2022, because it's going to take 6 to 8 months to get the bonding, the funding. So now we're into almost 20. I don't know when we would possibly have physical security. So what I'm asking one of the board members to do is move a motion. You have $4,112,000 in your general operating budget. There's no reason why you can't take $2 million from that, or $1.9 million from that, or you can take it from your $3 million in capital reserves. Again, somebody can pull a motion and get our 14 schools with security, or you could take a loan from the township for $1.9 million. You did it for the athletic fields, and we're still paying for that today. Why? I mean, I don't know how many more warnings you need to have, and these are non-scary. Kid gets a bike stolen from Carusi. 60% of the community wants better physical security. We should not have to wait till January of 2022 to get better physical security. Plants get stolen from Beck. People go crazy. No records of who got locked in the bathroom last year. These are all warning signs. And another one was on January 4th, 2017. 5 schools had bomb threats. Again, the police entered the school. There is no cameras. How do they not know? Because you're not investing in physical security.
Thank you.
Ann Einhorn. Is this on? I can't even hear myself. All right, Ann Einhorn, 1017 Edgemore Road. So while we're talking about where we can get money, I just want to introduce that Senator Troy Singleton from Burlington County's 7th District back in May wrote up a bill called S59 that would require municipalities to share payments in lieu of taxes, otherwise known as pilot programs. So they've been off all summer. There has been movement. Whoever's listening to this, I would encourage you to contact Senator Singleton's office, and let's get this bill started and pushed through. There's one other school district in this state that already helps their municipality that already helps their school district fund projects, major projects. We may not be on the scope of an economic development plan like they have, but we have economic development plans in place in this township. So whatever you do, start calling Senator Singleton's office. It would be helpful if we called Senator Lampert and Senator Greenwald to get this thing fast-tracked, because the sooner we can get that done, the better off a lot of our school districts will be in the state. So I am begging you, once again, because I'm doing a lot of begging at town council, let's get this going. As far as getting more alternative funding, we have been at this process for over 15 years. The alternative funding is drying up. So unless we have a designated person that's able to write the grants that the community is demanding, we're not going to get too far in this day and age. So once again, Senator Troy Singleton, 7th District, Burlington County freeholders designated, I think it was $20 million to their schools to improve security. So if they can do it, I'm also working on Camden, and I'm not trying to beat my own horn here. I just, I'll just a person of action, just go and let's see. I was taught to ask. You can only be told no. So let's work on Senator Singleton. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, if not, I'm going to turn to Dr. Malash to address as many of the items as he can.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. And I'll just kind of work backwards since that's how I have my notes. Mrs. Sugars, Mr. Goodwin, and I had an initial meeting with leadership from the township, with the mayor, council president, and some of their staff to discuss pilot, what the monies are, and we once again expressed our extreme interest in sharing in those when they become available. So we've had an initial meeting. We will continue to follow up as that goes forward. The food policy, the unpaid meals policy deals with breakfast and with lunch. It is both of them. Dr. Podowitz, again, I will take a look at that blog to go through. We agree with you about the funding from the state and the impacts. Ms. Arroyo, Rosie, if you will let us know, if you can email me directly or Mrs. Wilson with that. And we'll talk, too, about the resources for the community forum. It would be nice to have additional resources for the community forum as well. I think I've addressed these. There'll be additional discussions about board docs and what that looks like for the vote between what's audible, right, what's being said, and what's being pressed to go through. Talked about the policies. We will certainly, Dr. Smith, I know, is meeting with the elementary principals this week. The dismissal is absolutely one of the things that's on there. Just what's the impact and the change with kindergarten. Part of the reason is why we're systematizing it in those policies that were put forward. The threshold for free and reduced lunch is set by the Department of Agriculture. It's a number that they issue to us. When we look at anybody that's on free and reduced lunch is automatically waived into the student activity policy. So anybody on that list does not pay the student activity fee to go through. And really, other than that, there is not a threshold in terms of families that we support. Because again, families look different. Different structures, you know, and depends upon what the need is and what it is that we can provide depending upon the activity. I think that's pretty much. The file for this, good question. The file for the strategic planning that Mrs. Sugars went over, we will get that posted. We'll get it we'll work with technology to format it so that it is visible, but we will, and it'll link, I'm guessing, Mrs. Wilson, through the bond page, right, to go through? So yes, that will be posted. The information about the policies, the new policies that we discussed tonight, we will go through and finalize the drafts for them, and they'll be released with the board agenda a week Friday, next Friday, the 20th. And then the public, as we do policies that are being read for the first reading, that'll be accessible publicly, but we will finalize from the discussion tonight. So that'll be out after that. Right, I think that's it. Good.
Thank you, Dr. Malash. And with that, I would like to have a motion to adjourn. Mr. Abadia and Mrs. Scarpellina.